back to another episode of KSP 1. In the last episode, we left off preparing to go back to Jool and tow our Jool station over at a Tylo orbit and knock out our contracts there and then make it back, which we are going to do now in episode 27 here. But before we launch the vessel that we had prepared for this mission, or these missions, we do have to make some minor alterations. So I'm going to head back into the VAB here and load up our J1. And the minor alterations that I speak of revolve around having enough Delta V to complete this and be able to make it back, because there was not enough fuel for this mission whenever I decided to give it a test run while I was waiting to get more data to be able to do this. So I'm going to grab the command pod, raise the vessel up to get more room here in the VAB, and then head down here and begin to work on rectifying this mistake and preparing this vessel for its mission real quick, and then we will get it underway. Now, in order to pull this off, we are going to have to add more Delta V, which means we are going to be using some larger parts now. So I'm going to begin by adding on to this central stage down here by grabbing a TD25 decoupler and setting it to grandparent part. And I'm going to grab some of these larger reaction wheels. I'm going to set the top one to root and then copy it 3 times. I'm going to put a fourth one on, setting it to heaviest part and then copying it to where there are 3 of those as well. And then, before we go any further, I'm going to open up my engineer report, keep it open. So we're at 170 parts and 480 tons. It's time to have a little fun. In the past, when we've tried to use this much Delta V with these larger parts, this many parts, it became unstable. But let's hope that doesn't happen again this time. We're going to skip the S3 tank phase and go straight down to S4. And hopefully add enough Delta V to be able to make this happen. So now that we have the S3 adapter, the S4 adapter, and the largest S4 tank, we're going to put the S4 engine cluster adapter tank here. Make sure all of this is set to grandparent part. And as you can see, we're going to have to be able to pull off over 872 kilonewtons of thrust. Actually, way more than that. 8,719.7 kilonewtons of thrust. It's not going to be very easy, per se, but we'll start off by grabbing the Rhino. That'll give us 2,000. Set it to root part. Now we just have, if we really want to make this efficient, we're going to have at least 8,000 to go. So in order to pull that off, we're going to grab the vector engines, which we can place pretty much anywhere on this if we want, which we will be doing. We're going to set it to radial 4 here, and then set those to root, and we're going to copy that and set those where they would normally be on this adapter tank. And that should give us about 10,000 kilonewtons of thrust in a vacuum, which it will be because we are going to be launching this from space. Now we just need to make sure to separate the upper 5 from these into their own stage. Like so. And then we just need to make sure that the decoupler staging is also correct. We'll just have to take this one, place it down here, and then it should be good to go. So let's save our progress there, strut this thing up, and prepare to send it on its way. And we will strut it up first and foremost by going to these outer tanks up here on the original first stage. Looks like we're pretty much going to be forced to set it to radial 2. That's okay. Just find the center on this tank adapter here, or as close to the center as possible. Do the same thing to the other ones. Just trying to get a good beat on where that's going to be. Make sure that the radial 2, okay, so the radial 2 wasn't done correctly. We're just going to set it to radial 4 from the adapter tank then. But we'll get rid of that, and then go to the one that we had initially placed. Like so. And then zoom in, find a good spot on this, and set it to radial 4. And then find the proper place to put it on the central staging, the outer tanks there. Say about there. Should be okay. Looks like it's grabbed on. Everything looks good. And we just need to strut this up just a little bit more. We'll radial 4 from the central stage again to these outer tanks, like so. Let's place this right over top of that. Should be fine. And now we just need to find a way to strut this new stage to the outer stages and the central stage as well, which we will try to do by doing radial 4 here up to these reaction wheels. It's a little laggy because of so many parts now, but we'll work past it. We'll radial 4 there. We'll go over one space, keeping radial 4, strut it up a bit parallel there, or as parallel as possible. We'll do one more set of radial 4 struts on the other side. And then we just need to find a way to strut it to the outer stages, which means we may have to just strut it to the engines, but we'll see. Let's begin by placing one down here. We'll just place it down here at the bottom of this tank and see where it grabs, and then work from there. May not look like it's strutting, but it is. Let's place one more above it. Find a place to place this on the engine a little closer. And then one more set, or actually we're gonna have to correct this. Let's make sure these are set to radial 4. We're gonna put 2 to the sides, radial 4 to the sides of the engine. After we put those, we're gonna have to go back and fix the other ones since they were set to radial 2 for some reason. But after we get these on, like so, then we just need to grab this, make sure it's set to radial 4, and fix that. Same thing with these. And after we place this, we should be okay. We just need to put the launch stability enhancers on for liftoff from the MUN. Say, looking good, I believe. We should be okay. That extra 1300 delta V, that's going to be a lot more once we are launching from the MUN. But first we need to get these stability enhancers on. It'll cooperate. There we go. Just need to find a center of mass now, at least as close to it as possible. In fact, I'm just going to place it up here. Set it to radial 4. And then we just need to drag those down to the launch stage, the very first stage. That should be fine. Alright. Hopefully that will be stable enough and we can get this done. So let's go ahead and save the craft. And then make sure the proper kerbals are... Okay, yeah, they're good. Alright, let's go back to the Space Center, and then we need to head to the tracking station and set up our transfer so we can make our way to that station on the outskirts of the Jool system. Once we arrive there, we will into Tylo orbit and then making our way back home. Along the way, see, orbit Tylo, return to Kerbin from orbit. That's our primary mission. There's not much else to do there except for non-contract missions that we already outlined in the previous episode, which will be undocking from the station, pulling away from it enough to be able to rendezvous back up with it, dock back up with it, and transfer between the two vessels. Knocking that out so we don't have to worry about that in the future. And we can grab some space from the... we can grab some science from the space high above and near Tylo as well. But for now, we need to get that transfer window ready so we can begin the mission. Now, as previously described, we are just waiting for Kerbin to reach the edge of its orbit to where we can draw a line straight to Jool. Looks like we are only about a quarter of the orbit away from that now. We're just simply waiting for that. And then once we have that ready, we will launch from the Mun and make our way to Jool. But in advance, I'm actually going to make sure the Mun is where it needs to be as well, so we don't have to really fool around a whole lot more. We can just get this going, because it is going to be quite the mission. So we are approaching where we need to be now. As soon as that touches that line, I'm going to cut the warp, zoom in, find out where the Mun is in its orbit. It's looking good. We may not be able to see Jool, but we can see the line to Jool. So, looks like the Mun's almost where it needs to be, but there's still enough play there for us to be able to launch and warp around our orbit a little bit after making orbit around the Mun, and then head off to Jool. So it's time to get this underway. Let's go to our launch pad now, and then we will select our J1, and the crew should already be pre-placed, and it is, so let's hold X or A on the Xbox and select the Mun launch site and get this mission underway. I believe this will be the largest vessel that we, if it's successfully launched, it will be the largest vessel that we have put into play so far. Say the last time that we tried to use the S3 and S4 tank stages, it didn't quite work out as well, so we had to go back to the Rockomax tanks, but I have a good feeling this time. So let's get this underway. Let's launch. We'll keep the throttle about halfway up, so we move up nice and slow at first. Not too much on the G-forces there, at the risk of breaking the vessel apart a little bit. And we gained a little bit of delta V where we're launching from the Mun, as previously stated. I'm going to start throttling up a little bit and move over towards the horizon mark. And then lock on there and go full throttle. Hopefully all will go well. In the meantime, while it's doing its thing, I am going to open these two solar panels now, or extend them, and go to the map screen and check out our apoapsis. Get a nice good view of it in advance. It's barely increasing. Now it's lowering. That's not good. We need to raise this back up a little bit. And the fear of smashing into some of these mountains. Check out our apoapsis. As soon as that hits about 50,000, we're going to cut, warp to it, make our orbit, set ourselves up for this transfer, and then make the transfer. Alright, we should be able to go back towards the horizon line now. The process of making that 50,000 meter mark. And there we are. Is that about half our fuel? Yep, not bad, not bad at all. Vessel is stable, we're off to a good start. So now that we are on our way, we just have to wait till we hit 5,000 and then we can begin to warp towards the 50,000 mark to make sure to set ourselves to prograde along the way so that when we arrive we can reorient our vessel automatically. Once it hits about 49,000, I'm going to cut the warp and let it do that. 3, 2, 1. And now it will slowly make its way over to the prograde mark, even with all the reaction wheels that we have placed on this. That's okay, we have time. Should definitely be there before we hit 50,000 meters. And so that's 1400 meters per second of delta V that we're not going to have to waste now, which is good. We are definitely going to need that. Seems to want to take its time now that it's getting closer to the prograde mark. Let's go to the map view and see how far away we are. 1.5 minutes, that's fine. In fact, I'm going to cut that down to about 30 seconds, then let it continue to orient to the prograde from there. It's going to need the time, I believe. Trying not to use any RCS on this vessel at all, just in case. Never know when we might actually end up needing that RCS, to be honest. The way that this turned out whenever I was testing it. And as a note, I don't always test these. I've only done that twice in these episodes. Otherwise, what you see on camera is just me playing and doing it. Right there on the spot usually. The only times I have tested anything prior to is whenever the game abruptly cut off during the Duna landing. I wasn't able to stream again that evening, so I just went on ahead and did it for the heck of it. And it's kind of what I did with the Tylo testing, because I didn't have data to stream at the time, so in all that time I spent waiting to get data to stream again, I figured may as well test it. Because Tylo is not an easy place to do anything at. Looks like we're fairly prepared here. We just need to warp over to the other side of the Mun so that the target mark is around the prograde mark. Wouldn't hurt to make a couple orbits to line ourselves up a little more correctly. Maybe one more orbit, honestly. There we are. Now we'll just let that move on over to the prograde mark and begin our transfer. Which, by the time we hit that prograde mark, we should be right where we want to be with that target mark, starting to overlap into the prograde mark. And it's looking like it will be. May even be a little behind, because it's awfully close to the center of that prograde mark, but that's okay. This is very much an ideal transfer window. As long as Kerbin's alignment didn't get too messed up from all that time warping. Let's find out real fast. Nope, in fact that looks perfect. So, with that, I'm going to try to get rid of all this rotational wobble we have going on here. Because that seems to not want to lock onto the target mark. In fact, I'm going to do a quick save and then reload the quick save just in case something's going on. Alright, let's load that. Then let it reorient to the prograde again. We don't have too much time as the target mark is starting to pass the prograde mark, which we don't want to happen. And I don't know why our navball reticle just went right past the prograde, but it won't matter. Loading this quick save should take care of that. Okay, now let's just lock ourselves back onto prograde. In fact, I'll begin to thrust up a little bit soon, just to get it moving a little quicker. I'm going to turn the SAS off and let it go past that target mark and prograde mark a little bit to, say, about the edge of where the target mark is there. Then lock it there and slowly throttle up. It doesn't wobble and bubble too much on the navball, or the vessel itself, I suppose. Let's get this going. Stable enough, I'm going to go full throttle. We are leaving Kerbin's sphere of influence. We've left the Mun sphere of influence, now we're leaving Kerbin's. Let's check our fuel. So about 400 meters per second, so at about 1200 to 1300 meters per second in velocity on our navball there. Should be able to time the stage about then, so we can quickly climb up to that speed. So we should be about halfway between Duna and Travis by that point. Perhaps. Maybe. We'll find out. That's a good amount of added delta V for this though. It's just what we want. Because, like in prior episodes, I do like to over-engineer just in case. Alright, so let's throttle down, decouple, slowly throttle back up, move away from that, get it away from those outer stages so it doesn't smash into those. Go back to full throttle and continue along our merry way. May end up doing a lot of inefficient maneuvers just to save fuel. And the quote-unquote testing that I did while I was away for a little bit there, did a lot of senseless maneuvers, which ended up costing a lot of delta V fuel. I even had to take away fuel from the top stages to fill back up the central stage where the mainsail is, which was not ideal at all. Ended up using up all four of the recently added 4 outer stages at the top, which really didn't help out a lot, which is also why we had to add more staging and fuel tanks still to be, so on and so forth. We should be very close now. Let's see, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's focus on Jool, zoom in. And once we are zoomed in, we need to time warp ahead until we leave the Mun sphere of influence, so we can get a beat on where we're going to be entering the Jool system. Zoom out a little bit and find out where that is. That's not bad. We're not really going to be able to bring that down efficiently until we're about halfway to Jool. So I'm going to continue the time warp now. Now that we are out of Kerbin's sphere of influence, I'm just going to time warp ahead a little bit more. Once we're out beyond Duna, I'd say it'll be time to burn anti-normal to bring that periapse down. Let's see where it is relative to the station. Pretty close, pretty ideal. We'll set the station as our target now. Try to find out where we are in our transfer. Let's say that's a fair enough place. We'll just go ahead and cut our time warp now. Let the vessel reorient to anti-normal. Looks like it's time to stage too. Once we are pointing anti-normal, we'll go ahead and stage. Want to make sure that we are pointing anti-normal first though. It looks like we probably did waste a little bit of delta V there because we did not eject those stages at the proper time. So just make sure that you're ever watchful of that. Now that we are pointing anti-normal, I'm going to go ahead and stage and then boost away from those a little bit. Send those on their merry way. How much fuel was wasted? Not really a whole lot, honestly. Okay, that's good. Okay, now it's time to make sure that the orbital line of the station is nice and flush with itself, and then we will burn anti-normal and bring that periapse down until it is somewhat in line with our station there, like so. How's that looking? It's not too far off. And just like when I tested this, it is going to be on the opposite side, but that's okay. For now, we need to try to burn retrograde a little bit, I guess, so we can bring our periapse back out. We want it to be as close to inline with the station's orbit as possible, which I believe is what, 221 by 225, if I remember correctly. Yep, 221 by 225. So we're going to bring our periapse out to about, see, at that point it wants to be, or we'll want it to be at about 223 million, in between 223 million and 224, I would say. Wow, okay, so that's actually all the way out at 227 million. Okay, anyways. Are we coming in from the right side? Yes, because our Jool exit is over there, which means we are rotating this way, which is good. It's time to make the transfer. We will begin doing so by doing a little time warp to make sure it doesn't mess up our periapse too much there. And then let's time warp close to the periapse. And once we arrive, we'll warp ourselves to begin our retro burn. Once we have achieved orbit, we'll cut the burn, or we'll cut the throttle, and warp over to, I guess, the ascending node, since it's the closest one next up in our orbital line, and we'll burn anti-normal and correct that down to 0, or at least as close to 0 as possible. And after that, we'll warp back around to the periapse, or at that time it might be the apoapse. Guess we'll find out, but it should still be the periapse. We'll warp back around to it and begin to set up our encounter with the station. It's gonna take, I want to say, about a minute and a half until we reach our destination. Trying to think what we can do in the meantime. Oh, we can keep an eye on our resources and make sure everything is okay with our vessel. We can close the time warp menu so we don't mess it up while we're doing so. Now we should have rotated this to where the solar panels would be oriented north and south instead of east and west here, left and right. Should be up and down. That way it always has a chance to collect sunlight, but looks like we'll be okay. Now another thing that this is also going to knock out, since we have yet to do this, since last time all we did was deliver this station, it will knock out rendezvousing, docking with, and transferring between two vessels in orbit of Jool. The one thing I didn't do while I was testing this, while I was offline for a while there, was complete the undocking of the station and rendezvousing back up with it again in orbit of Tylo. So hopefully we'll have enough Delta V to be able to pull that off. If not, this will become a rescue mission once we send our Kerbals on their way back home after we're done towing the station to Tylo and making orbit and attempting to do that. At the very least, I know that we are going to be able to pull that off and leave the Jool system. Hopefully with the added Delta V we'll be able to make it back. So now we're about halfway through our warp to our destination. We're just waiting for that now. Let's see what else is there to explain. Oh yeah, okay, so this won't be finished until we get back from Kerbin, so we won't know what our next mission is until we finish this up. Would have been nifty to just have orbit Tylo without the return from Tylo part, so we could grab another mission while we're already here, instead of having to launch all over again and make it back to Tylo. And hopefully, since we took the recover science data from the surface of Tylo, as well as grabbing a lightstone and returning it to Kerbin from the surface of Tylo, hopefully since we took those, it will be a Tylo landing. But at the same time, I'm kind of hoping it's not a Tylo landing, because like the Eve land and return mission, which thankfully we did not get a contract for, Tylo's land and return mission will not be an easy one to complete. It won't be as hard as landing and returning from Eve, nowhere near as hard, but it's kind of like leaving the Mun and making your way over to Kerbin and landing on Kerbin, but then launching back from Kerbin and making it back to the Mun minus the atmosphere. Like, the only real difference in that is the atmospheric pressure, as well as having to use atmospheric engines versus engines that you can use in a vacuum that are more efficient for vacuum use, since there is no atmosphere on Tylo. So it's still okay to use engines that you would use in space, as opposed to engines that you would use in atmosphere to launch from Kerbin. So now we are about a minute away from our time warp destination, and we can then begin getting this underway. So again, to recap, we're going to have to dock back up at this station that we deployed in the last mission, or the last episode, and then we're going to have to tow it from its current orbit down to a Tylo encounter, and then once we get that, put it in orbit of Tylo, and I'm going to aim for about a 50,000 meter or 50 kilometer orbit around Tylo. Reason being is because if we do get that Tylo land and return mission after this, we don't want it to be too high up around Tylo. Like, you can very easily achieve an orbit around Tylo at an altitude of anything higher than 10,000 meters is safe, even though its gravity is still very powerful. It's very much like making orbit around any lunar surface, but 50,000 meters in altitude is ideal for a station, so it doesn't get pulled in by Tylo's massive amounts of gravity or gravitational forces. That way you can leave it in orbit around Tylo and be able to time warp and do other things and not have to worry about the station slowly being pulled in over time. And also, we're going to set it there in preparation to be able to send not only one vessel, but a second vessel to dock up to that station. Reason being, we're going to send a primary vessel that will return after the mission is over, and then we're also going to send a lander that's going to land on Tylo and return to the station. And then we're going to bring all three back home with us, just like we did with the Eve and Gilly station. We want to be able to land on the surface of Tylo and bring that vessel back to complete the land and return. At least we would have to do that one more time, which we don't really want to do. Alright, so now we have made it to our destination. We have reoriented to the retrograde mark. It is time to time warp close to the periaps. So we have 3 hours and 3.5 minutes. Let's go ahead and time warp close to that. get a view of Jool there and its tiny little moons where we are so far away. Are there any other moons we can catch a glimpse of out here? Not seeing anything. Let's see where those moons are on their orbital paths. Got one over there. So there are 5. Okay, so there's one there, and we can see the other 3 close to Jool. See, there's one there, and there's Lathe. Where are the others? Not seeing them. Thinking that I may just be blind. Yep, I must be blind because I'm not seeing them. See, the other one should be around here somewhere. Not too easy to see. Okay, let's just get this moving. Alright, let's begin our retro burn so we can put ourselves into Jool orbit. Much better with those 2 outer stages still attached to the vessel and able to be used. Good to have that Delta V. Just keep an eye on our Jool escape and watch it as it wraps around. There goes our apoapsis on the solar orbit, flinging itself on by. We should be fairly close to making Jool orbit now. Don't see this taking more than another 15 seconds at the most. But once that starts to wrap around Jool, we'll start to see encounter nodes pop up, and before we get too close in orbit, we need to cut ourselves off and then reorient ourselves to anti-normal in preparation to warp to our ascending node and bring that 4.6 down to a 0. And once that is locked on to anti-normal, we will do our time warp, but before we do so, we need to make a quick save just in case our friendly neighborhood Kraken decides to take a crack at us. Alright, now let's begin to time warp ahead manually a little bit, make sure it doesn't mess anything up. Then we will get a nice beat on that ascending node and warp over to it. The thing about Tylo too, at 50,000 meters in altitude, time warping is going to be tedious. Very tedious. It's going to take forever to wrap around Tylo. But that's okay. We'll get to that here shortly. Let's begin correcting this ascending node now. Once it hits about 0.5, I'll cut it off until we are nice and close again, and slowly bring that down to a 0.0, or 0.0, like so. Ooh, might have overshot that a little bit, but it's all good. Now, we need to warp back around to our periapsis, for the sticklers out there. I know there's another term for it too. I just can't quite remember what it is right now. And we are time warping almost half the time it took to get the Jool. So by the time we reach our apoapsis, we're not going to be moving very quickly at all. That's why it's taking so long. But we will wrap back around to the periapsis and try to retro burn it as close to a matching orbit of the station as possible, but not completely, so we can get as close to an encounter with as little amount of relative speed to the station as possible. Because if we make our encounter with our orbit as eccentric as it is right now, we're going to be coming in pretty hot in terms of relative speed to the station. If we bring our apoapsis down a lot closer to the orbit that the station has, our relative speed won't be nearly as bad, and we won't have to slam on the brakes nearly as bad either once we make our rendezvous and encounter with the station. I don't think I've ever mentioned that in prior episodes, but now that we're this far out into our missions and our tutorials, and here at Jool, where you can see you can be pretty far out in a Jool orbit, and it's still able to grab a hold of you. That's pretty useful information to know, as opposed to other locations where you have to reduce your orbit a lot more than this to be able to stay in orbit around those other planets, except maybe Eve. But I digress. Now you know. And that's what we're planning on doing here around Jool, anytime we do this. But in future episodes, we're going to be launching the stations to the lunar orbit of the target moon that we are going to be doing the missions around, instead of having to tow it to lunar orbit around whichever moon our missions pertain to. We are very quickly starting to come back around now, picking up speed. Should be at about maybe 1200 meters per second by the time we reach the periaps, I'd say. Maybe a little more. Okay, so couple hundred more. Now that we've reached the periaps, just about, say we're still about a half hour away, that's good. We'll reorient to the retrograde mark. Let's go ahead and preemptively set that, and then zoom back out. And then once it hits retro, let's also go ahead and preemptively put that there. And we will finish our time warp to the periaps. And remember, this is 221 over here and 225, so it's going to look... Or no it's not. Disregard that information. We're going to bring our orbit down to about somewhere around here, I'd say, for best relative speed and countering. But let's begin to do that now. Very slowly throttle up, because we have a little bit of shaky shake going on there. In fact, let's deactivate the SAS and then turn it back on, and then lock back on to retrograde and get back to our map. Just keeping an eye out for some encounter nodes to pop up. We may not be within the orbit enough, so we might have to wrap back around to our apoaps now and bring our periaps down just a little bit more, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and do that. It won't take as much time now that we brought that in. We're maintaining our speed a little bit better since we are close to Jool. It requires us to have more orbital velocity. Not sure if I covered it in the last episodes, but take a look at the orbital speeds of these moons here and check out the difference in their speeds the further out they are and the closer they are. Like Pole, 1400 almost, all the way in with Lathe here, 3200 almost. Bit of a difference. Alright, now let's highlight our periaps and try to bring it into about, let's say, 225, somewhere between that and 224. We should get an encounter or intersect node. Let's bring it in a little more. Looks like that's relatively close to being right in line and over top of that. Now that we have two intersect nodes, we definitely know it is. We will go ahead and warp back over close to that intersect and periaps. I mean, see, it's 43 days, 1 hour away. That's 43 days and 3 hours. We don't want to warp past it. We need to warp as close to it as possible. There we go. Then once we reach that, we will slowly throttle up and watch our intersect nodes as they wrap around, trying to get a good beat on where we can get an encounter where this orbit will be in as close to the station's orbit as possible. In advance, we also do need to make sure that we have both these intersect nodes highlighted. And once we are locked onto our retrograde, we will deactivate the SAS and re-enable it, and then in doing so get rid of the wobble and bobble like so, and then lock back onto the retrograde. Let's update our quick save, and then go ahead and try to make this encounter happen as efficiently as possible. Looks like we're just going to take the next alignment on the intersect 2 node that we get. Since we are about as close as we can get in our orbit, we're going to have to bring it in even, I guess. It's looking rough. Might actually have to bring it back out in the opposite direction. Now, for the sake of not wasting Delta V, I'm going to go ahead and just reload that quick save. Because apparently I brought that in too much, and I don't want to botch it up that bad and waste too much fuel. So as soon as this reloads, we're going to reorient to prograde. And once we do that, we'll just extend the orbit until our intersect 2 lines up with the intersect 2 node where the station will be. Try to bring it down as close to 0 as possible and get docked up with the station. And I may either cut off and take a break at the hour mark or extend the episode. I'm not sure which just yet, but we'll see. So I have about 4 hours to spare, I believe. Should be plenty of time to get in a few episodes and knock out some more tutorials and missions. But again, let's get these intersect nodes highlighted now that we are locked back on to prograde. Let's deactivate the SAS, reactivate it, do that a couple times until our wobble and bubble is gone. Lock back onto prograde and slowly throttle up and bring intersect 2 or intersect 1, whichever, back onto itself. That's not really happening though, is it? Let's try to make this happen. We'll just do a little bit of time warping until they're a little closer, so we're not wasting as much Delta V. Oftentimes, that's probably the better approach in a situation like this. Hopefully we don't have to do this too many times, so we're not wasting too much time. So once our vessel hits the intersect node, it'll wrap around. Okay, it's looking like we might have to do this quite a few times, but I guess we'll see. Thinking I did perhaps bring our Apple axis down just a bit too much, I suppose. We'll see just how much that target node versus the intersect node actually moves once we hit it again. So it's moving at like 8% intervals. That's not really ideal. So we'll just try to extend the Apple axis out a little bit more again, and then do a little bit more time warping, and then we'll make this happen. Also want to make sure that that's still in line with the station's orbital line properly. Looks like it is. So let's just go on ahead and mosey on over here to the intersect 1 and periaps nodes. And once we get there, I guess we'll try to extend our Apple axis out a little bit more and see what happens. Once we are locked back onto prograde completely, let's begin to do that now. We'll extend it out to, say, 800,000 or 800 million meters. And we'll see what that gets us as we time warp around a little bit. That's much better. Okay, so once we reach the Apple axis, we are going to cut our time warp, lock on the prograde or retrograde in advance. In fact, let's just set it up to automatically warp over to it, and it will cut itself off at that point. Well, it's taking its sweet time, so we're just going to do it manually instead. Let's cut the time warp about now. Let's exit time warp mode and then do the rest on auto, since it won't take nearly as much time now. Now we're going to be pretty careful now, so in the spirit of being careful, let's go ahead and Set the thrust limiter as low as possible on every one of these, but not quite at 0. Try to get it to at least 1 or lower. 1.8 will be okay. Cooperate. Okay. Well, okay, that also works. Or it won't really matter if they're all the same because it's going to be moving so slowly. But let's highlight that intersect node, get a nice view of it relative to the target position node. Begin to bring that in. Okay, now we have another one to watch, which may hit first. But let's throttle up full at our little 1% throttle capacity on all 3 of those engines. As you can see, it's still moving that intersect 2 in pretty quickly, even at that speed, which is exactly why we wanted to do that. So here in about 40 seconds, it will have a nice counter lined up. We're not going to fool with the throttle limit because we'd have to do it multiple times if we did. We're just going to let it slowly coast on over to that target mark. Once it hits it, we'll set them all back to full throttle if we need to, depending on what our relative speed is going to be to the station. If it's not very much, then we may just leave it alone, which it should not be too much. So it might be about maybe anywhere between 500 to 800 meters per second, maybe even less, but it's going to be a heck of a lot better than a few thousand meters per second. Now we're down in the 80,000s. And with the throttle down so low, say if I cut the throttle now and then slowly move it up, that's how fast it's going to be moving when we're trying to get this pin down to 0 kilometer in distance, which I doubt we'll be able to do accurately on the first pass. But after we get relatively close to it and punch the brakes on our relative velocity to it and make our second burn towards it to make the encounter, we'll definitely be able to bring it down at that point. So we still have plenty of delta V since we're barely even burning. It's a testament to just how much thrusting can alter things in space at such great distances. So now we need to be very careful, keeping an eye on that as we bring it in nice and close. Sometimes it's even better just to eyeball it to where you have those nodes right over top of each other. Let's go ahead and slowly bring that in, or at least attempt to. We're trying to keep an eye on it as close as possible in our zoom. Looks like maybe 10 more seconds or so at best. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. That's as close as that's gonna get. Now we're gonna have to make some adjustments to try to bring that in a little better. We'll start by try to figure out if we're gonna need to burn normal or anti-normal first. Looks like our line is looks like it's pretty much right on line. We could just do a radial burn, which we will try with a radial in first. We'll wait for that to align itself. But once we lock onto radial in, we'll do a quick save. In the spirit of just in case. And where that's right over top of the target mode, it's making me wonder if we should do radial out. But we'll find out. Now that we're locked, let's do a quick save and see what happens when we slowly throttle up. Yep, so it is supposed to be radial out. So we'll let that realign, and then we will bring in our line a little bit closer. I'm not sure an anti-normal or normal burn will help us much at all let's also, just in case we forget, do this ahead of time. Let's open our docking port shield. Alright, now it's time to finish what we started here. Let's bring that down. Okay, so can't really bring it down a whole lot. Well, I think it was like close to 94 kilometers or so. So we'll just correct that one last time with a radial end burn. And we can try to do a normal or anti-normal burn to see if we can bring it in a little closer than that, because that's going to be quite the distance to work with, especially after having to hit the brakes and slam down 483.4 meters per second of our relative velocity. But regardless, we are going to make this happen. Okay, so 88.2 was as close as I saw it get. Let's try a normal burn, see if we can bring it down a little bit more than that. The more we can bring that down, the better. That way we don't have to do this too many times. Because if we were to try to hit the brakes at 88.3 kilometers away and then lock onto the target node, we'd have to come in pretty hot towards the station to be able to narrow it down to a 0 kilometer separation. But if we can get it closer, we won't have to approach it as quickly on our second approach at the encounter. I think once we're docked up, I'll be calling this episode I'll be cutting it there, and then taking a short break, and then resuming after that in a separate episode to tow this over to Tylo, put it in orbit, do another rendezvous, and then leave Tylo and make it back to Kerbin. Something seems up with our... Aha, okay, it wasn't showing it, but there was some trimming issues going on. If you ever notice that, just hold L1 or the left shoulder button on the Xbox instead, and then just hit the left stick in without moving the left stick at all, and you'll reset your quote-unquote trim. Looks like it's awfully close, and it's going to keep going. We'll just time warp to stop it from moving any further, and then let it move over to the normal mark from there. That may have messed around with our encounter a little bit too. Looks like it didn't move it around at all. That's good. It's really having a hard time reorienting itself on the nav ball there, isn't it? I have to do this manually. Let's cut the SAS off and let it slowly move to that normal mark. Once it's nice and close, we'll just cut the SAS back on. I don't know why it's having such a hard time. May need to do a quick save once it's right over top of the mark. Looks like that's about as good as it's going to get. Let's do a quick save and then reload it. I don't know why it's doing that. Don't like that, not one bit. It's what it did earlier when we had to reload the quick save. Too much wobble and bobble. Hope I don't have to restart the game, but hey, if I have to, then I can do that after we cut the episode and when I take the break. So that works. Shouldn't be having this problem since this was freshly booted up and straight into the stream, but I don't know. I'm not sure if it's really a bug issue. It might just be a vessel issue. Didn't really have this problem when I was testing it though. It's a bit unusual. Alright, now let's lock on to the normal mark and get this done. Hopefully the normal mark is what we're going to need to get this done. Hopefully we don't have to wrap back around and lock on to the anti-normal mark. Okay, let's get this re-highlighted and slowly throttle up. Fantastic. Okay. Let's see just how low we can bring. Wow. Okay. This is much better. Once that descending node is right on top of those, it's about as good as that's going to get. Let's prepare it to lock onto retro in advance, And we are going to have to burn the rest of these outer stages and then use some of this central stage once we get there to relative speed. But we're doing good, making progress. Once we're locked on, I'd say, yeah, it's bringing it in a little bit more. That's good. Not gonna complain about that, even though that seems a bit sketchy. But reaction wheels will do that. We're not using RCS at all, so it's not that. Once we, there it goes again. Getting a little wild. I'm not sure why it's doing that. You know what, let's just go ahead and do a little bit of a manual time warp so we can see if it affected that. It did not. Let's see, that is 103 days, 2 hours, and 4 minutes away. Bring it in a little closer. That'll work. Let's prepare to make this encounter happen and make this dock happen. Play a better song. Let's also double check those engines and make sure that we did set those thrust limiters back up because I have a short-term memory. Looks like I forgot one. Alright, so as soon as we arrive from our warp, I'm going to fix that. Let this thing reorient itself to retrograde. Make sure it's set to target mode. That way we're burning retro relative to the target. Don't want to mess that up. Once it's close enough to the retro, I'm going to manually warp that in a little bit closer. Hey, it brought us in a little bit by 0.1 kilometer. That's good. And then I will cut right about there. See just how close we are to it. Let it go ahead and bring itself in a little bit. Once it's right on top of that, I'm going to do that again. Bring ourselves down to about a minute away. That should give us plenty of time to do this. It should be a safe distance from the separation node to be able to do it. 3, 2, 1, cut. Alright. It's time to start slowing ourselves down, but we need to keep an eye on our fuel on those outer stages as well. So we can see our station very quickly coming up. We'll bring it down to about... Okay, there we go. Let's go ahead and cut those now. And then continue to bring our speed down a little bit from here. Looks like it's going to take about 34 seconds or so. So how far are we away from that? 50 seconds. And it's increasing our separation node time, so let's cut that. Or else we risk separating ourselves more. We don't want to do that. Now, right here, I'd say we'll begin to bring that down to 0. Once it hits 0, we'll use RCS to bring ourselves in a little closer. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Close enough. Alright, let's do the rest with the RCS. Let's go to docking mode, make sure we are in linear control mode, turn on the RCS, pointing retrograde, disengage the SES and turn it back on. Locked onto retro without locking onto the retro node. Use the right trigger and bring ourselves down to 0 meters per second. It's a little slow, ain't it? Let's deactivate the RCS and just set the thrust limiter on this down as close to 0 as possible. We'll just hit the brakes that way. We can even use the RCS a little bit to assist in that. So we're not using as much fuel, even though it's barely using any fuel at all, to be honest. And really just to make it happen a little quicker. But as soon as that hits 0, actually once it's close to 0, we need to cut the engine off. So at about 0.1 we'll cut the engine off and then back off on the RCS. And then bring it down to 0 with the RCS with little incremental puffs. There we go. Alright, let's disengage the RCS, lock onto the target node, and target mode on navball, make sure that we are doing both. And let's raise our thrust limiter up back to full capacity. We're going to barely thrust up at first, like so. And then we're going to go back to using our RCS in linear control mode and try to get that prograde mark right over top of that target mark. And as soon as we get that, let's deactivate our RCS and then throttle back up a little bit. We'll bring it up to about 25 meters per second. That should be good. Once it hits 25 meters per second, let's cut the throttle and point ourselves retrograde. And if you look on the map, we have an encounter coming up now that is 0.1 kilometers away. Mostly because we adjusted our prograde mark with the RCS to be right over top of the target mark. Because of that accuracy, we have very little separation, and upon arrival, we'll be moving at 25 meters per second relative to the station, since that's what we increased our speed up to. We can just cruise on over and dock up. So let's do a quick save just in case anything happens, like here in a second when we manually time warp ahead once. Okay, so it didn't mess it up at all, that's good. Let's just bring it on in nice and smooth now. And cut. So we have about 30 seconds now. You can see it coming in pretty quickly. Remember, it's not going to take too long to punch the brakes. We're only going to be 100 meters or less away from this thing. Let's go ahead and start cutting our speed now. Bring it down to about 10 meters per second at this point. That'll give us about a minute until we encounter it, even though technically we already did get the encounter accomplishment up there on the little sidebar menu. Just about 45 seconds out now. Once we are close to 100 meters, we're going to bring that down to about 5, maybe less meters per second in relative velocity. So we're about 15 seconds away from that step. Let's go ahead and begin to throttle up just a hair in advance. Okay, now we're coming in at a nice speed. Keeping an eye on our distance there. Now that we're close to 70 meters away, let's go ahead and try to bring that down to about a meter per second relative speed. I believe we're close enough, to be honest. Let's just go ahead and try to kill that speed. Again, once you get close to 0, use RCS, let that take over. Try to get that as accurate as possible. And we'll lock onto the target node. Make sure to set your control. Say now that we're docking, the control needs to be from your docking port. You need to do the same thing with this vessel. And make sure it's the appropriate docking port. The docking ports do have to match. Don't have any lights on this vessel, but that's okay. Let's set this to target node as well. And we'll let those adjust until we see no more movement. We need to make sure that our rotation is good as well. Let's go to rotation mode and docking mode here. And we'll rotate this to where the solar panels are at opposite ends of one another when they dock. Let's wait for it to kill its wobble there. In fact, we'll just turn off our SAS and turn it back on, then retarget the target node. Alright, good. Let's swap back to this vessel. Do a quick save, and it automatically put us to SAS on our lock instead of target, which is good. We don't want to keep it locked on a target. It's okay to leave it locked onto the target node on the other vessel but one of them, preferably the one that you're controlling from, should be set to SAS mode. In fact, I'm going to set this one to target mode and then do the SAS mode with this one. So we are using the RCS on this vessel instead, so we can save it on the other one, since this one has well over 1,000 or 200 monopropellant and fuel. Let's switch back to linear control mode, reactivate the RCS, and use that right trigger. Bring our speed up to about 1 meter per second. That's good. Make sure to aim our camera at the docking port. This one will be a lot easier to push the speed up on and reduce the speed from, since it is a much lighter weight vessel. It'll be a lot easier to work with. There we go. Alright, we'll just let it take over from here, deactivating the SAS and the RCS. Nice smooth dock. Good alignment. Now that we have completed that, we just need to transfer a Kerbal between the two vessels. And that'll knock out all of our rendezvous and docking and so on around Jool itself. So you go to transfer crew, we'll transfer Bob over, and then we will highlight this one and transfer Bob back over. Looking good. Now we do need to make sure that we set our control back to this command pod. As you can see, the nav ball shifted around a little bit, and that's why. We still have plenty of fuel at this stage. That's good. We're going to need it to be able to haul this vessel over. It can push 150 tons in space with 150 kilonewtons of thrust, and right now we have a total mass of 116 tons. So now that we've done that, and we're 12 minutes over on the episode timer, before I cut this for a quick break, let's check this out. We have performed a rendezvous maneuver around Jool, check. Started constructing a station around Jool, technically, check. Performed a docking maneuver and performed a crew transfer near Jool. So that's that. Now, in our next episode, we are going to haul this into Tylo orbit, leave it there, and make our way back. But before we make our way back, we're going to undock, get some distance from the station, and then rendezvous back up with it, so we can knock all that out around Tylo, so we don't have to worry about doing that again, and wasting any money or time having to launch another vessel out to do that. And after that, we'll just make our way back home and see if we have to do a Tylo landing and return. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and update our quick save one more time, and I'm going to go take a break. Let's actually activate the SAS and lock ourselves on the retro, and then update the quick save before I do that. Once we are there, I will update that quick save, and I will be back in about 15 minutes or so for episode, I believe, 28, where we will hopefully be able to knock out the rest of that and finish the mission and find out what we're going to be doing in episode 29. But for now, thank you for watching. Hope you are learning something. Hope you're enjoying the journey. And I will see you all again here shortly. Goodbye.